guest, Bryan Landers of Backstage Capital. He's a venture partner there, but was one of the first entrepreneurs in residence, COO, and has had over a 4-year career there. So we're going to ask about his experience in investing, also being an ally and focusing on diverse founders. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Sergio. Hey, everybody. Good to meet you all. I'm Bryan.
Yeah, well, thanks, Bryan, for joining us. So just to dive in and taking a step back, can you share a little bit more about your background and Backstage Capital?
Sure can. Yeah, so I'll start with my background. So in the sort of tech sphere, I have a whole other sort of life where I was a musician, which we can get into if you want, but sort of relevant to the tech side. Sort of started working. My friend was the first engineer at Pinterest. So I worked with the founders there on their first, HTML email campaigns, transactional emails, that kind of stuff. Ended up working for a Y Combinator company called Zapier, which is a SaaS integrations platform, which kind of glues together all the business apps that everyone uses out there.
Love Zapier.
Yeah, cool. There you go. Co-led product there with one of the co-founders and, led design. And then made my way sort of an odd path, which I hope we get to talk about, into VC, working with Arlen Hamilton, the founder and managing partner there. And Backstage Capital is a venture firm, very small. It's sort of everything under 100 million is considered micro VC, and we've invested, about $7 million to date. So it's nano VC. But who we invest in specifically and exclusively are underrepresented founders, which I hope resonates with the audience who's watching today. So for Backstage, that means people of color, women, and LGBTQ founders. And Arlen, again, the founder, identifies as all three of those things, which is how she kind of originated that thesis. She wasn't seeing money going to those founders. And she, after trying to, forge those connections and kind of not having success, just decided to do it herself. Facing great adversity along the way, but then also great success on the other side.
Great. And can you share, how did you make your way from, I know your background is graduating from the California Institute of the Arts, background
right.
in fine arts and jazz. How'd you go from there to venture investing? Can you walk us through that journey?
It's even funnier. Jazz performance on banjo. That's what my degree is in, my BFA. So, there's no way I could have known back then that I would get into venture. I didn't even know what venture was. I mean, I had been doing tech like web design, web development since like 1997. So I've definitely been in, had a foot in that world, but I was in the arts world. So my friends were animators and, other musicians and dancers and videographers and photographers. So that's who I was surrounded with in college. But I had always been kind of making for those people websites and content management systems. The tech thing was kind of parallel. And to be honest, too, it was hard to make a living, just as a musician, especially as like a touring, recording banjoist. I lived in Nashville for a few years and made a go of that. But I think I was always making more money doing web work than I was just freelance consulting than I was from music. So at some point, though, the kind of paths, I saw a split in the road, and I was less interested in music, and tech startups were just blowing up. Like I said, that was right around the time Pinterest was getting started, and it was things hadn't hit quite the sort of level of popular culture, where startups became a hot thing. It was still kind of, something geeky, and it wasn't super romantic. It's actually the truth of it, which is starting a company is really hard to do and sucks for the most part. And most people probably do not want to do it. Even more so on the venture path. So my, exposure to venture capitalists was just, they were the people on the other side of the table from the founder. They were the ones who give money, take people out of, CEO positions when the board kind of votes you out.
That's what everybody remembers is the bad stuff. They're like, all right, you're out, and
yeah,
the investment. But yeah,
it can be like that, and it can be adversarial, and there's definitely bad actors. But what kind of happened, and I think even starting around when I got more focused on tech, was that it became, I guess it was honestly, information became more available. And so once there wasn't quite the sort of disadvantage of founders not knowing anything and VCs being professional, negotiators and money, world people, the playing field started to level a bit. And that's happened to date to the point where there's boilerplate contracts for anything. Anyway, I got off track there. So yeah, I mean, I was kind of on the other side of it, from the founder side, and working at companies and startups. And that was my exposure to VCs. And I had no intention of getting into VC actually when I first met Arlen. And it was because I had a podcast I was doing, and I started noticing that underrepresented founders were not being featured in tech press. And I was interviewing them for the first time, and they were amazing. I mean, they had all the sort of pedigree that like you hear of in the VC world. So they went to MIT or worked at Google, and, you know, all this, and company has amazing traction, and they've grown to this many people, and just checked all the boxes of a really like amazing story from a sort of press perspective. And I would be the first one interviewing them, and it didn't make any sense to me. So I dedicated the sort of second half of the first season and the whole second season to featuring underrepresented founders. And so I reached out to Arlen to ask if any of her portfolio companies, because she's had that same thesis since the beginning for underrepresented founders, to see if any of her portfolio companies wanted to join the podcast. And then we ended up kind of just, you know, having a half-hour conversation, and then it was like an hour conversation over at her place in West Hollywood. And we realized that her story, which a lot of people now know, and she actually just released a book as of May 5th that sort of documents this incredible story that she has. That was the one I wanted to feature, and we decided together that we would feature Backstage and Arlen, and kind of bring on some of her portfolio founders to kind of give testimonials about what it was like to get a check when no one else would write one for you. So they kind of snowballed from there. And then, you know, all the sort of roles you said I've had over the years, you know, from entrepreneur in residence to principal to COO to general partner for a couple months there. So yeah, it was a wild ride, and I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Can you share how did it actually happen? How did you end up meeting her, and what shifted from, hey, you're working on something interesting? I know you interviewed her, right? It's like,
Yep.
how did you shift over to, you know what, like, let's work together?
Yeah, you know, I think some people you meet in life that just kind of become fast friends like that. And, you know, we had very complementary skills. So I remember, you know, even after we did the interview together, which went great, and she really enjoyed hearing from other founders. And I can talk more about that in a little bit. But yeah, you know, she needed a deck together for raising money from limited partners. And so like a lot of this audience is people wanting to get into VC or like already in VC. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. So she, you know, had an LP deck, and I remember helping with the design for that, and sort of branding and marketing, and just kind of, because she had this amazing vision. And when you marry that to design, you can really make something, you know, stand out and be awesome. And she already had like amazing quotes, and I think she was up to like 30 companies by that point. It just clicked. And then it was, okay, wow, that worked really well. How about we do the Backstage website? How about we start doing all the marketing at Backstage? And how about we co-found a nonprofit together? And then that was it. I was the first employee at Backstage. And, you know, I think it was just through showing up every day and putting in that hard work, and all being completely aligned around Arlen's vision, which was our mission to help underrepresented founders succeed. That was why everyone that worked at Backstage works there. No doubt about it.
That's great. I love the mission oriented, the diehard nature. So, you know, being completely blunt and forthcoming, you're a white guy focused on underrepresented founders. What like, why did you choose to do that? How is it being an ally in the space?
It's an honor. I've through Backstage, I've had, I would say, an amazing sort of privilege to be, you know, witness to a lot of things that are happening for underrepresented founders. I've been in rooms where I'm the only white guy of, you know, all women or all people of color. And every time I just learn, you know, everyone's talking about it right now with the sort of race issues going on, and racism specifically. I've had a sort of, you know, almost like a boot camp in empathy by kind of spending so many years with founders, kind of hearing about their experiences, because the world does not.
I love how you articulate that as a boot camp in empathy. So that's like, at the core of what we need is the understanding, right? Like that's great.
Well, as a white guy, like you said, like I cannot experience the world as, say, like a Black gay woman like Arlen, you know, self-described, like will see it, like it will behave differently for her. So I have to actually kind of learn through other people, like what these experiences are. What is it like to be treated that way? What is it like to be seen that way? and not even to get into like the emotional sort of, dealing with that or the trauma that causes, but just to be like aware of it, so the more I kind of learned about that stuff, it just strengthened my resolve to, contribute to leveling that playing field. But I'll tell you, like, there was never like a sort of, compromise. A lot of times people attach underrepresentation to someone that needs help or charity or impact. Even we're talking about impact on the show today. I have not found that to be the case. Like the companies that we work for and with at Backstage are amazing. They have, like I said, they come from amazing backgrounds. They have amazing founder market fit. They have huge missions. So to me, like, there was never any sort of like, oh, I could be off, investing in just people that look like me. I was, we are sector agnostic, by the way, too. So I got to see everything, any kind of industry, any kind of tech. So yeah, I would say that, like, it's interesting. I can't wait until a world where we don't have to kind of recognize that and call it out, and that it's just another good investment or another good company, and everyone can kind of just see that that's the truth.
I love it. What are some of the things, as you're looking at founders, that you're doing to elevate the the best investments?
Yeah, I mean, hustling our butts off to try to do, to get co-investors. So introductions, Backstage Crowd is an initiative to kind of get actual, accredited investors, but like at a greater scale, at smaller dollar amounts, to be able to invest. So it's a bit of democratizing investment in general. Promoting Republic campaigns for people who are doing equity crowdfunding in our portfolio. It's a lot. It's honestly, like, this is the job of a great venture firm, is to just, endlessly, support your portfolio companies. And it's a 1,000 different ways, but that's like the full-time job of it. Like, way more important than like the deal flow part or, other things, because your success is tied to the fate of these companies, right? So you got to do everything you can to help them succeed. But yeah, the other thing is, just one thing that I was a big part of at Backstage was on the marketing side, kind of sort of combating that thing I was talking about, where underrepresentation is kind of seen as like a less than or something like that. And what I did is sort of fight against that, was just show people as they are, but they just happen to be women, they happen to be people of color, and they're kicking ass and they're doing really well, and they're just seen as successful just like they truly are, and not like, this Black woman raised X million dollars, like, let's all cheer about it or whatever. Like, that should not be a big headline. I cannot wait until that is not 10 Black women who have raised over $1 million or whatever. That's depressing. That sucks that that's the world we live in. So to me, like, just showing strength, one of Backstage's core values is diversity is strength. It's not something you bolt on to like something, another existing system. It's like you cook it into the DNA, because it will yield great results if you choose that path. I can go on and on about why, because we felt that pretty deeply at Backstage. But yeah, does that answer your question?
Absolutely. And you can share more about why why do you think that? What are some of the proof points that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like you have to get the low hanging fruit first. Like, there's so many studies. McKinsey has one, Deloitte has one. Everyone has proven again and again that having a diverse team yields better results. So it's a fact, right? But people still don't have diverse teams. You look at tech. This is still an issue. There's still people heading up DEI, like diversity, equity, and inclusion roles within Google and Apple and you name it. So why is that? And I think that the reason is because people don't truly believe that it's an advantage, a competitive advantage. But here's the way I look at it. We're heading for, I think, some numbers say that is it like 2040, we're going to be hitting a majority minority population. So any group who's a minority right now will become the majority of the US in a short amount of time. So no matter how you feel about it, our future is more diverse. The customer base you have, the investors you get, hopefully, we'll see how that goes. And we're chipping away at that. But, and also the founders that we have to look to for like innovation and creating that new world for that diverse population. So to me, quite simply, diversity is the future. I see Backstage as we're investing in the future. You tie that to looking at like pop culture, movies, music. Look who makes the most sort of contributions to that, and it's ironic because Black women specifically get like the least amount of, they get 0.6% of venture funding, even though they're 7% of the U.S. population. But look at like their outsized sort of contribution to culture and like all these other arts I was talking about. So to me, there's a huge what we call like arbitrage opportunity investment, right? Like there are deals being left on the table that are going to be huge outcomes that people are just not seeing. Maybe they don't understand the market. Maybe they don't, they think this diversity thing is like lowering the bar and all that kind of, stuff that you hear, or pipeline problem, none of which are true. Yeah. What were you going to say? I can tell you're ready to jump in there.
No, I was going to ask more about your portfolio and can you talk about how do you find some of these founders of color? So for other investors entering the space, they might be allies and not have a strong deal flow in underrepresented communities.
Yeah.
Partnering with Backstage Capital is one, but what are other ways they can build a pipeline like you all?
Yeah, definitely partner. That's awesome. Come find us. But yeah, I would say, let me say first what worked well at Backstage and then kind of extract from there. So
Perfect.
Number one, having someone who can write checks, who identifies as the people that you're trying to attract, you're never going to do better than that in terms of, sort of recruiting the right people, because they can see that someone in a position of power who looks like them is like going to give them a chance and like knows, the specific challenges they've faced. And, so people seeing Arlen as the founder of Backstage, you're never going to sort of, that's the best competitive advantage I can think of. So recruit, more diversity onto your team at the check writing level, full stop, right? That's like the best thing you can do. But I will also say that just being inclusive of people had amazing returns. So Backstage says we are for underrepresented, founders. We were like a, beacon for all those founders because they're getting ignored by many other investors. There are some co-investors who work with us who have, similar or, parallel missions, which kind of attract the same founders. But, we stood out like amongst the sort of other investors out there in terms of like who we were marketing to and who we were speaking to and advocating for also. So just saying like, for instance, like Latinx founders, like this is a firm for Latinx founders. We invest exclusively in these founders, and it's all about generational wealth for that group of people. You're going to get like a lot more people than if you just say, we invest in SaaS companies, this MRR, you see the difference there. Like if you're someone that speaks to, it's like night and day, like that someone's calling you and someone's like, you can't really tell if you're a good fit for it or not, so that's another lesson in just being inclusive. And if that means having a side fund dedicated to, a specific demographic that you're trying to have an impact with, or, working with some local program somewhere to kind of help. There's a lot of awesome programs here in Los Angeles, like Grid 110 is a nonprofit in town, and they just opened South LA, sort of like an accelerator program. And that's awesome. You could partner with them and kind of, have your cred kind of be, backing them and sort of, tied together as like a partnership. That would be an amazing opportunity, and you would definitely increase deal flow. So it just depends on, what your focus is, but actually, saying out loud that you want, a specific person to come and engage with you, you will have more success there. And I think a lot of VCs just miss that,
what are some things that you all are doing to better? So how many portfolio companies does Backstage have?
130.
Okay. So in supporting a portfolio of 130 underrepresented founders, what are the unique things that you're doing for that, specific to that community?
It's a good question. It's funny because a lot of the same stuff works really well for a specific audience. So for instance, like we have a Slack, right, which is, I'm sure, super common at a lot of, venture firms. But our Slack is special. Like I think our Slack is really, first of all, it's just kind of pretty active, and there's a lot of people kind of, passing opportunities to each other. It's a very like It's the opposite of like the zero sum thing. It's like an abundance mindset. You know, everyone's kind of helping lift each other up, but they also can commiserate about like tough experiences, you know, maybe like being mistreated by investors, or give a heads up that like someone was hard to work with, or just venting. You know, being a founder, being a Black founder right now is pretty intense, you know. And I think that like having a safe space to be able to let off that steam, or, you know, get into a heated argument where, you know, people are all aligned around kind of, you know, coming together around what we're sort of exploring, can be just a huge deal in terms of like the support that you need to do this really hard job of being a founder. But yeah, in addition to that, a lot of it actually is external. So because Arlen has such a big sort of social media reach, and Backstage does too, we can promote them. So we can promote the founders through the, you know, the newsletter, the mixtape newsletter that we have, through just Twitter is like a great sort of place to do that. And then they get picked up by different other places. Even Arlen's like press contacts, she will like intro a founder who has a specific story to, you know, a reporter she's worked with before. So that's a huge advantage. Trying to think of other special things. Because platform is a huge part of VC. Once you have portfolio companies, it's like a full-time thing. Like someone could do, you know, just that. You could have a team at that for 130 companies. So we do, you know, it is a struggle to kind of have the impact you want for that many companies, but do it in a scalable way. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. That makes sense. It's thinking about what the community uniquely needs and how you can support them, but you can, and again, you're speaking to this. It's the same tools, but it's a different
Yep.
community, which makes it that
Yep.
much more unique and supportive. So
Yeah.
that's great. And for you know, can you speak now what for yourself in your journey into venture, where do you see you know, venture going? Where do we need to go to
Ooh.
better support you know, underrepresented founders?
Yeah, good question. Interesting. It's a very interesting time amidst COVID-19 and, you know, racism in America and what's happening, sort of Black Lives Matter. Like this is a really interesting time to be alive. And you know, I'm pretty optimistic that things will be changing for the better. Just to be talking about these things is I think a huge breakthrough. And, you know, hearing everyone kind of talk about it feels a little bit different this time. I hope that that's true. But I would say, what's happening right now in VC is like a full on, you know, confrontation of like, you know, values. You know, even if people, you see the sentiment on Twitter a lot, at least I do in my social circle, like if people are doing the, like, we're open for business, like we're, you know, we're investing in people. We've made 2 investments remotely from, you know, since COVID happened. Then people are calling them out and going, you don't have any women founders. Like you don't have, you know, any partners who are people of color. So to me, like it's a bit of a reckoning happening. And I think that like it will become harder and harder to hide those sort of, you know, no matter how vocal you are about supporting or donating or mentoring, are you actually writing checks? This is yeah, like hire a
Hire a
wire, right?
wire. Yep.
Yep. So, you know, that's it. Like I think that right now, you know, VC has to kind of, we need to shine a light on what's going on. Like what are these numbers actually, and really look at this as a problem. It's a systemic problem, and it's not just sort of, it's not going to go away because it's been years of people talking about diversity and it doesn't happen. So I'm hoping that what we see in the future is a bit of what I was talking about earlier, where, you know, diversity doesn't become a competitive advantage anymore. It's just part of things. Like we don't have to celebrate when, you know, like a person of color gets like some amount of money. We just go, great, another good deal done. They had this merit. They had this awesome company and mission. Let's celebrate that, you know? I just hope that this divide of like the sort of, you know, I almost hope, let's put it this way. I hope that impact and, you know, returns and sort of return on investment and, you know, all this kind of merges, and we don't have to like, because, you know, that's what's happening in consumerism, right? Like consumers care deeply about which brands they buy from, the story behind them, the mission behind them, what it means for them to buy from them. That will hopefully push over into this investment world, and they will just kind of merge and become, you know, you have one one viewpoint of the world. And like, if something you're supporting, you don't support something if it doesn't fit with your worldview. You can't exploit people in one place just for a financial gain, and then be giving charity over here to something else to kind of make up for it. It's not like a carbon offset kind of a thing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. How do we, I think, and speaking of more of what we can do, you mentioned a few things is, hire a wire,
Yep.
backing founders, build it. I guess that's the ultimate, right?
That is. Yeah.
And what do you believe needs to change? Taking a shift to VC in general. Do we need to, yes, there's, calling people to hire a wire, but how do we make it not be temporary, right? Like not be just a fad people focus on now. How do we in the same way we have systemic racism, how do we have systemic cure to this ailment? Right?
Yeah. I mean, the most obvious thing that we have to acknowledge is that there needs to be diversity among investors. I don't think you get there. We've been looking at the results. We have the results now of what happens when you don't diversify the investment community. I don't think it will ever truly flip over and become, serving our actual diverse population until that happens. So I can't overemphasize that enough. And your program helps specifically underrepresented VCs, right? That's one part of your program.
Yeah. That's we have an investor training program. Everybody can take it, but we have we emphasize underrepresented VCs and how to investors at large and how to train them. That's our kind of our mission or focus: democratize access to investing. So that's where we're going. So
that's the best thing I can think to happen. Number one. And then let's see, after that, I think that this accountability thing is huge. That's part of how you I hope we don't forget, I think that how once Tracy Chow from Pinterest kind of called everyone out on the diversity numbers.
Absolutely. It put up or shut up. Did you see that campaign? I love it.
Yeah.
Love that campaign. Every company's, for those that are watching that haven't seen it, calling every company to post what their leadership metrics are in terms of diversity, and no matter where it is, just to say this is where we are.
Here we are.
To be very forthcoming about that. It's excellent.
It was a huge deal, and I feel that kind of carried on. We are still talking about diversity at Google. There's been walkouts. There's been, there's more kind of attention and activity happening around that since that conversation kind of broke open. I hope a similar thing is happening right now for underrepresented founders. I hope we don't stop talking about it. And I know that that's exhausting for people, who have to live that life. And this is, again, why allies are so important, is because there needs to be burden on shoulders of people who look like me, because having me say this is a problem that we have systemically means something different than someone who's actually facing it. And also just the burden has already been on the shoulders of the underrepresented to kind of, lift themselves up, and they're doing it in spite of all the systemic, issues you talked about earlier. I got off track though.
No, that was great. And can you share more of how do we invite more people? So if you are a person of color, right, and engaging people in the conversation, how do we open the door to more of those conversations, help them feel more comfortable? There are things in general, or even, for both sides, how to, speaking from a person who's an ally. I'm thinking of when, I don't know if you know the exact moment you made the shift to to becoming an ally officially. Probably don't remember a moment.
It's every day, right? You have to live it.
How did you go from what helped you make you, of course, Arlen pulling you in is probably part of that. But can you name some of the things that we can use to implore more people to join the movement?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I would say educate yourself to the actual facts. So, I mean, it's so funny. I tweeted, not maybe a year ago or so, just the statistics of US population as compared to who gets venture funding. And people in the comments are arguing with it and, talking about that's not the true census number and blah, 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 completely missing the point that whatever, if it's 9% or 11% and, this group is like 52% of the population for women. That's something's wrong there. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, let's not quibble over those numbers, wait, so what was your question? I lost the thread there.
How do we make out, like, how do
Oh,
we bring
yeah.
more allies into the game?
Yeah. So educate yourself about the numbers was where I was going there. And then to me, once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. And it was like, do I want to live in a world or propagate a world in which this fact is true? No, like, I don't. I can't be cool with that. And so if you don't care when you see that, you have to kind of ask yourself the question of, what would it take to get you to care? Like, if it takes maybe being involved with more people who don't share your exact experience in life, try that. I got to do that all at the same time because, I was the only, white man at Backstage for almost exclusively the whole time I was there. And it was, women of color in positions of power. Like, it was the flip of like most, organizations. But I got to sort of, live in that experience during this time when I was, researching all these facts and everything. So that's another way you can kind of spark that sort of empathy for yourself. If you can't be convinced by the abysmal numbers and, can't be bothered to care about it at that point, then maybe that will kind of spark something if you care about humans. I'm being a bit like sarcastic here or whatever, but I'm just trying to call out that, like, yeah, I mean, how can you not care about like what's going on with huge portions of of humanity, and if all of that still doesn't like convince you to like give a damn, be greedy, like do what you do best and like look for the big opportunities by people overlooking, investments. Find the best deals of, people of color, find the best Latinx deals, find the best deals with women, CEOs, and just like capture those and get, work your way into those deals, because there are going to be more successes who are founded by those founders. You can either get in them or not. And if that doesn't compel you, then I don't know what to tell you. I think you're probably not watching this show though.
No, I think that's great. They're saying that it's not charity. There's ROI to be made. There's opportunities overlooked.
Yeah.
It signals an opportunity in the space
This is so true. So Arlen, many times in the beginning said, Backstage is not an impact fund. It's just a fund. We have a thesis that we believe will lead to outsized returns, but it's like, because everyone else is like not, seeing it, and she can see it because she, like it is her, and so like it was a competitive advantage from the day one. And it was actually like challenging to sell it as like, no, I know what you're talking about, diversity and impact and whatever. It's not that. It's a fund for the best founders we can find. And they also happen to be people of color, women, LGBTQ,
Absolutely. That's what we say at RBL1. We back the rebels, but we're,
right.
With a lens toward they're great financial investments, but they also happen to be founders that are overlooked and under-resourced. So
yes,
no, that's great. Yep. So, but I will pause there. Thank you, Bryan, for sharing your story. And again, for those watching, this was RBL1 Live. Please join us to hear from more investors and founders focus on accelerating the Rebels. So thanks again for sharing your story.
You got it. Go Rebels!